Hello, and welcome to Encounters with Polish Literature brought to you by the Polish Cultural Institute, New York. I'm David Goldfarb, and I'll be your host. Some of you may recall Jerzy Kosiński's novel, Being There, and the great film with Peter Sellers based on the novel. It was about a man named Chance the gardener who had been isolated his whole life and protected by a rich family who kept him on as a gardener, like a hothouse flower himself. And he knew nothing of the outside world except what he saw on television. After the death of his patron, he was on his own, and through a series of accidents and misunderstandings, people thought that his statements about his garden were allegorical reflections on life and philosophy. And he floated to the heights of political power through no effort of his own, because his enigmatic sayings were interpreted by others in ways that they saw to benefit them. There was some controversy around Kosiński from critics who claimed that his English works were so heavily edited that he couldn't have been said to have been their sole author, and they accused him of plagiarizing Being There from an older Polish novel that hadn't yet been translated into English. Well, I'd like to have another episode on Jerzy Kosiński to consider such questions and think about his work in a more general way. But today, we're going to look at that 1932 political satire that he was accused of plagiarizing, The Career of Nicodemus Dyzma by Tadeusz Dołęga-Mostowicz, which in itself is one of the most witty and popular novels in Poland of the 20th century. Having been made into a television series in 1980 and a film in 2002, the characters have become popular archetypes that everyone knows. Tadeusz Dołęga-Mostowicz had a short but prolific career as a novelist and columnist, producing most of his output in the 1930s. My personal favorite period in Polish literature, the time of Witkacy, Gombrowicz, and Bruno Schulz. But Mostowicz is a satirist, experimental perhaps in his own way, but grounded in politics and society in a way that the avant-gardists were not. It was an era of burgeoning fascisms all over Europe, high Stalinism in the Soviet Union, all kinds of radicalism in politics and the arts, sexual liberation and experimentation with narcotics, which Gombrowicz writes about in his late interviews with Dominique Deroux, published in English as A Kind of Testament. Gombrowicz writes, in the pre-war days, something odd was happening to people. I saw with amazement how, with the war, Europe, particularly Central and Eastern Europe, entered a demoniacal period of formal mobilization. The Nazis and the communists fashioned menacing, fanatical masks for themselves. The fabrication of faiths, enthusiasms, and ideals resembled the fabrications of cannons and bombs. Blind obedience and blind faith had become essential, not only in the barracks. People were putting themselves into artificial states, and everything, even and above all reality, had to be sacrificed in order to obtain strength. What was all that? Glaring idiocies, cynical falsifications, the most obvious distortions of reality, a nightmarish atmosphere, monstrous horror. These pre-war years were possibly more damaging than the war itself. We live today in a world of political polarization in many countries. The urgent threat of world war. Know-nothings becoming world leaders. For all the artistic creativity of the 1930s, I hope the political formations of that era remain buried in history. I considered translating The Career of Nicodemus Dyzma myself as a novel for our time. I was delighted to find out that I was not the only person with this thought. And that brings us to our guests. But before we meet them, I'd like to thank everyone who has been following along and supporting Encounters with Polish Literature. If you like what you hear on this program, click the thumbs up down below. Ring the bell to get notifications about new episodes. Follow the playlist of all our episodes in the description of the program. Leave a comment if you can, and please click the subscribe button to show the Polish Cultural Institute New York that you are interested and would like to hear more. Remember that your engagement reinforces our position in the YouTube search algorithm, and that your active response will help the program rise in the search rankings so that more people can find out about Polish literature, its past and present, here on Encounters with Polish and sometimes Ukrainian literature. Speaking of which, be sure to hang on and watch the credits at the end for some recommendations about where you can donate to support Ukraine and Ukrainians fleeing the war. Today's guests are translators Ewa Małachowska-Pasek and Megan Thomas. Ewa Małachowska-Pasek is the Ladislav Matejka Collegiate Lecturer in Polish and Czech Studies at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Her research interests include applied linguistics, second language acquisition, and critical Romani studies. Megan Thomas lives in Ann Arbor and is with Ewa Małachowska-Pasek, the translator of Zofia Naukowska's The Romance of Teresa Hennert. Go back to watch episode 7 of Encounters for more on Zofia Naukowska. And they're the translators of Tadeusz Dołęga-Mostowicz's The Career of Nicodemus Dyzma. Megan is a specialist in public elementary education in high poverty communities. Ewa and Megan, it's great to have you here on Encounters. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having us. We're really happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Mm-hmm.
So how did you two meet and start working on translations from Polish as a team?
I met Ewa because I audited her third-year Polish class at University of Michigan when I moved to Ann Arbor, and I was instantly taken by how smart and funny and elegant my Polish teacher was, and we really hit it off. And then, God, when was it? Like a couple of years later, we started translating Ewa? I can't remember.
Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't remember exactly when, but it was just, we started with The Romance of Teresa Hennert. Mm-hmm.
Right, and it was our first time translating, and we ended up really enjoying it. Just, we had a lot of time just like playing with words and having really interesting arguments and conversations, and the work went really, really smoothly, and we ended up being a really, really good, on a good team.
Did it start as a language learning exercise, or was it you were really like aiming by that point really to publish a translation of Naukowska's novel?
I think we were really, honestly, we were aiming kind of high into the fire. We really wanted to get this novel out. We both really liked it a lot. We were huge fans of her like ironic, very funny prose, and we were proud of our translation. We thought it read really well, and we were, foolhardy enough to want to subject it to the greater reading public.
Yes, I would add that also, I think that it was just this fantastic, vivid conversation between the two of us. So just perhaps we started collaborating, having in mind that we can publish something. But I think that the final result, or at the end, it was the conversation between the two of us. It was just fantastic. So. Mm-hmm.
I can sympathize with that. I've worked with people on projects together, and as academics, we don't often like collaborate in humanities so much as say academics in like mathematics are very collaborative, or in the sciences. But
working in a team too, it can be very morale boosting when, especially on a first time project, I think it's easy to, kind of get into the weeds and really start self-doubting oneself. And it was nice to have a team member saying, oh, we're on the right track. Let's keep going. Mm-hmm.
So the Career of Nicodemus Dyzma is interesting because it was an incredibly popular novel. It was made into 2 different films, I think, and a television series. And it's the kind of thing that Poles can quote, and that they recognize characters from, in the way that in English literature and American literature we can recognize, like, we could say somebody's a Scrooge, and we recognize characters from Dickens like that, and in Russian Gogol is similar in that way, and that there are these very vivid satirical characters. And here we are with this very realistic political satirical novel that Americans don't know. It hasn't become part of what we call the Western canon of Polish literature, as opposed to maybe what people are familiar with as Polish literature in Poland. So let me ask you, how did you decide to translate this work, and why now?
We really love this time period to work on. And after translating Zofia Naukowska, we really found that we loved working on novels that really explore the social map, that have characters that come from every level of society. And there's lots of different registers of language, and there's lots of different kinds of dialogue. And you have this, this ironic, omniscient narrator, but you have all these other people and all these characters kind of bustling around the pages. And as for a translation project, that's the most fun to work on, I think. But also, it was, I think, 2016 or 2017, and we were just really grappling with Trumpism in America. And at least I was. I'm sure I'm speaking for you too, Eva, and also the rise of the current government in Poland, and there were just and it just seemed like this is a time particularly stuffed of like Dyzmatic characters, and there were even like lines of dialogue in Nicodemus Dyzma that were so startlingly similar to things I'd heard on the news or reading in The Guardian, and it just seemed like kind of a perfect satire for the time because it was deeply, deeply resonant in a number of countries right now.
Maybe we should say a little more about for our audience what the work is about. Would you like to do that, or shall I?
I can if you like.
Go for
it. So the Career of Nicodemus Dyzma is the titular Nicodemus Dyzma is a kind of a nobody from the provinces who is kind of living this hand-to-mouth existence in Warsaw. And he, through strange circumstances, kind of crashes a very fancy party, and he is mistaken almost immediately for a member of the aristocracy. And he, is propelled upward through many, many encounters with people who are, opportunistically seeking something or have, some kind of like a self-preservation reason to want something from Dyzma. And the higher and higher he goes, the more popular he gets, and the sort of the more cryptic things come out of his mouth, but the more those things are interpreted as really wise, strong, visionary thoughts, and eventually, at the end of the novel, he is poised to take control of the entire country.
That's a good summary. I mean, like the opening scene is it's how he comes from this very like low point. He's like auditioning to become a taxi dancer, and which is
free, like zero dignity with Dyzma's life.
Yeah, and he's in a salon in a restaurant, and he's a totally inept dancer, and somehow he finds this invitation like a courier is dropped off of a tram, and he means to return it to its owner because he sees the address, and he's immediately like drawn in that, oh well, yes, this is your invitation, right? So and that's how he gets invited to the
free food because he's hungry. Mm-hmm.
That's right, he's starving, and he can't get a job as a taxi dancer in a restaurant where he probably also hopes to have free food, right? And then he's on his way to becoming the leader of the country. The satire of the work is it's a lot of it is dependent on kind of Polish customs and manners, and of course, in general, in that era, all over the world, the Western world, you might say society was more stratified than it is now. But in Poland, even more than that, there's just built into the language more stratification between people on a higher level and a lower level, socially and otherwise, I think. And that's something that you've got to communicate in the translation, right? I mean, and then there's very peculiar aspects of Mostowicz's language. I mean, he's using a lot of foreignisms and Latinisms that in Polish are they really stand out, whereas often they're cognates to words in English. So like the words that are the hardest for the Polish students are often the easiest, I think, for English speaking students. How to bring that into the translation?
I mean, it's a fish out of water tale too, because there's a lot of, Dyzma's really trying to fit in wherever he is, and he has to, change the way he speaks. He has to change his vocabulary, and he's not a very bright guy. So there's a lot of malapropisms that are really a lot of fun to translate. What do you think, Eva?
Yes, so this is just the part about homonyms, because just Dyzma Mostowicz uses a lot of homonyms, and not only because he really loves to play with the language, but he emphasizes just the how little Dyzma knows about the world, how arrogant he is, because Dyzma, obviously, he's completely unable to grasp dual meaning of several words. And it was really challenging for us to translate those homonyms, because homonyms are different within every language.
Do you have some good examples?
Dyzma just does not listen to classical music and has never heard about music scales. So in the circles he actually now lives and functions. So just it's a no-no. So when Nina plays him a famous sonata.
So Nina is the love interest.
Yes, yeah.
So believes that Dyzma is a very charming, very erudite, cultivated gentleman who just has this like innate manliness in him that makes him a little bit curt.
Absolutely, and we have to add that Nina is just, we should say, Countess Ponimirska, and she plays for him a famous sonata composed by Tchaikovsky. He comments that it's a nice piece, asks how the words go and what it is called, and she's, of course, surprised and clarifies that it is Tchaikovsky sonata in C minor. And in Polish, it is sonata C-moll. And now it starts. So a moll is Polish word moll is a pantry closet moth. So now Dyzma is surprised, and he says, a moth? Silly. And why not a fly? Because obviously this C-moll, it's like fly, tsitsi or tsitsai fly. So just it was just for him, moll, moth, doesn't make any sense. So, and it was just one layer of difficulty. And another layer, it was just the fact that actually Tchaikovsky had never composed a sonata in C minor. He composed a sonata in C sharp minor. And so we decided to go with that because it gave us more possibilities for the translation. So we actually, in our translation, we rendered it in just in the following way. So Nina, Countess Ponimirska, asked, "Do you like it?" Well, he answers, "It's a nice piece. What is it called?" C sharp minor. C a sharp minor? Silly. Why a minor? And what's so sharp about him? And Nina was amused. Of course, she wrapped her arms around his neck and said, "My master is in a playful mood today." So it's actually one of my favorite moments because it took us some time really just to translate the bug part to actually something different. Mm-hmm.
It's I mean the novel is full of these kinds of landmines of that sort that you just you either give up on or you come up with something else, or there's really really no choice about some of those options. They're just not going to work in English as is. But the humor is the most important thing, right? I mean that's the first thing is you've got to get the humor out of it, because if you have to explain the joke, it's not going to work.
And it's a really funny book. So that's something that we really, really tried to do. We went through many, many versions, and we usually landed on what made us laugh the most.
that would be the way to do it, I think. So what else is going on? I mean, there's also these very bureaucratic, passages that because of course he's like working his way up through government, and he doesn't understand really how the government works. So he's like kind of coming up with his own gobbledygook, insofar as he can, or listening to other people come up with it. I think you had one passage like that in mind, and maybe we could read.
This is one of our favorite chapters. It was so much fun to work on. So this is the scene of the Masonic lodge and the peyote fueled orgy among the aristocratic ladies, and so there's a lot of pseudo kind of Illuminati gobbledygook, and it made no sense in Polish, intentionally so, because the character, this Miss Stella, who was a practitioner of the Masonic rites that all that the bored aristocratic ladies are devoting their nights to, and there was a part that Eva, you shared with your class, right? That was absolutely nonsense in both in Polish, but we had to render it nonsense in English too. It was basically a word salad of meaning nothing. So do you want me to read it?
Yes, why don't you? That'd be great.
So they are at a country home. The Dyzma, thinking that he's in for a weekend of sex and fun, goes with this Madame Koniec-Polska. But instead, it turns out that she has a bunch of aristocrats at her mansion, and they're going to sort of draft Dyzma into this quasi-satanic. So Dyzma is sweating and nodding, not understanding anything he's hearing. And Stella is really just trying to convince him to join them on this journey of an enlightenment. And he says, "You wouldn't refuse me, sir," she continued the attack. "An experiment with her? I have the distinct impression that your powerful will could easily break the spiral reaction of self-consciousness. The order's imperative is the ability to activate potential stratifications of higher forces, the existence of which the subject, or if you prefer, the object, has hitherto not manifested itself in the fourth degree, an intuitive conflagration." Luckily, Madame Koniec-Polska returned, and Dyzma wiped the sweat from forehead. And it goes on and on and on.
And on, yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's really amazing. And that's when I discussed Dyzma, his character with our students, I asked them to read this passage, and I asked them to tell me what this passage is about, because it reads really well. So just you read, and you think you do understand. So I asked, okay, so please tell me, what is it about? And they couldn't. And they say, well, it's something philosophical. It's just something highly spiritual. But I pressed them, but please tell me, what is it about? And they told me, actually, we don't know. And say, yeah, bingo. This is the translation. It's empty. There is no content. So it's meaningless. However, it sounds the way it should sound. And it was really hard to translate it. And this is Megan who did it. So she's absolutely fantastic. So, yeah.
I can't remember if I told you, Eva, when we translated this chapter, that when I was a teenager growing up in a very small town in rural Michigan, very similar to where Dyzma, grew up too, in his small town in Poland, and I was a good piano player. And one of the benefits and drawbacks of being a good piano player in a small town is you get invited to play piano for a lot of things. And I was invited as a teenager to play piano for a initiation ceremony for the Daughters of Job, which is a sort of a teenage daughter, a teenage auxiliary of the Masonic temple. And I too was sworn to death if I exposed the secrets of the lodge. Very similar. There was no peyote and orgy, unfortunately, but there was a lot of gobbledygook like this. So I just kind of channeled back to my teenage years, and I remember hearing stuff a little bit like this in these kind of Elks Club adjacent social clubs.
Well, that's, sometimes a translator, has to be kind of an actor, right? I mean, it's a lot like method acting, right? It's like bringing something from your own memory and performing the text in a new way. And maybe that's kind of the secret of Dołęga-Mostowicz or translating him, is reperforming, the text in your own voice.
His stuff is so much like a screenplay sometimes, because you really can almost picture like actors reading the dialogue. And the thing I really love about his prose is that he really veers from this like nonsensical gobbledygook, and then the point of view really goes directly to Dyzma and his internal monologue. So on the next page, I'm going to read a couple sentences because she's continuing with this ridiculousness. He alone was worthy to rule. Only he could justly reign over their lodge, wielding the principles of life, love, and death, these three rays that constituted the secret universal order of happiness. Dyzma was furious. He sat with his hands in his pockets and seethed. He swore to himself he wanted not the slightest part of this affair. Why the hell would he? Had he landed a job like this, a cash flow like this, to end up in jail? Hell no. These dames were nuts. I mean, and I love how like that kind of language could exist like in the next paragraph from like the esoteric path, I think is part of the fun of both reading and translating Dołęga-Mostowicz.
Right. And another thing that Mostowicz uses a lot is, there are these long passages. I mean, it's one of the great, challenges for any translator, working with the Slavic language is the use of diminutives. And Mostowicz is like, he knows that this is even ridiculous in Polish. I mean, that for his own readers, I mean, that it's a way to give a character a very distinctive voice. Would you like to read a passage, where that's an issue?
Sure. We thought we'd read it in Polish first and then English, just to sort of compare the sound.
Yeah.
That's how different actually those excerpts, those passages are. So,
Ewa, do you want to set the scene? What's happening in the scene?
I don't remember who Pilchen was. Oh, he was the Secretary of Transport, Minister of
Ministry of Transportation, and Dyzma needs him to enact the plan.
Prezesiuniu kochanieńki, zawołał Pilchen na jego widok. Ależ to słówko w cyrczku. Niechże cię kaczuszki podepczą. Myślałem, że szlaczek mnie trafi ze śmiechu. To się nazywa określonko. Może niezbyt salonowe, ciągnąc słowa, powiedziała jego żona, ale za to bardzo męskie. Słuszniutko, racyjka, mamy w naszym kraiku za dużo ugrzeczniaczków i fajtłapków, za dużo cukiereczków. Solne słówko tak działa jak kubełeczek zimniutkiej woniuni.
So maybe you can explain to our audience that doesn't understand Polish why that's so funny.
It is so funny because the diminutives, just everything is little. So there is like a little tea, little conversation, little darling, little everything. And it's just, it's so childish. It's so childish and it's not appropriate at all. So it's like I would say, quite a low style, but he is just the Minister of Transport. So it's just, it's really, really funny. Mm-hmm.
As if he's like somebody's, auntie speaking to her grandchild or something like that, but more so, but like 10 times.
Obviously, that wouldn't work necessarily in English. It just wouldn't have the same effect. It wouldn't quite sound the same way. But we wanted to convey the same kind of personality, this like kind of cheesy, avuncular, kind of glad-handing, like, just it's kind of a silly way of expressing yourself. And so we really kind of went back and forth on how to do this. And then finally we decided to use the most banal kind of silly expressions possible. And so in English, it sounds like this. That evening, Nicodemus Dyzma paid a visit to Roman Pilchen, the Minister of Transportation. He was a slight brown-haired man, always smiling and pleasant, renowned for his passion for corny expressions. He and his wife, a graying brunette of a highly Semitic type, gave Dyzma a rapturous reception. "Ah, Mr. Bank President, old buddy, old pal," Pilchen cried at the first sight of Dyzma. That little word of yours at the circus made quite a splash. Oh, by the way, the night before, Dyzma has gone to a boxing match, and at the climactic moment has screamed the word "fuck" in front of an audience. This is the only time this word appears in the novel, and it creates quite a stir and wins him a lot of new admirers who think that use of the word makes him a very strong, authentic leader of Poland. That little word of yours at the circus made quite a splash. Color me tickled pink. Why, I caught a case of the giggles that lasted so long, I thought I might keel over and die. Now that's what I call the right word for the right time. Am I right? It's none too courteous, perhaps, his wife drawled in confirmation, but very masculine. You sure are right about that. Yes, sirree. Our little old country is stuffed to the gills with too many spineless fraidy cats and capital L losers, too many softies and sweetie pies. A strong word now and then is like a great big bucket of cold water over the old noggin. Dyzma laughed and, exculpating himself, explained that he had gotten so worked up that he'd had to fire a few shots. After dinner, they got down to business. Dyzma had no idea it would be so easy. True, Pilkin explained that he wouldn't be able to offer a final decision until he spoke with the relevant department at his ministry, but by and large, he was prepared to do anything for the top-notch Mr. President. And besides, railway ties would always come in handy one way or another. And you have my pinky promise we'll take care of all this lickety-split by hook or by crook, and it'll be quick like a bunny, and that's my tried and true method, et cetera, et cetera. So we had a lot of fun with it, actually.
This seems like one of those places where you might have drawn on the current political discourse of the time that you were translating to find equivalents in English, was it?
Listen, I went through a couple of weeks when I was translating, kind of reworking some of our initial drafts where some of the things that characters said were so close to things that were actually being said by the American president and, leaders in the Senate and House of Representatives that I actually put in word for word sometimes until Eva's steady your head stayed my hand. And you were correct that it wasn't quite a good fit. But you're right. It was so shockingly apropos that it was a bit disturbing, honestly.
But it is true that that he's like kind of a populist leader. I mean, that's who Dyzma is. He achieves his success, by through his untalent. His talent is his untalent. That's anything he says just pushes him higher and higher.
Well, we have an expression for that in English. We fail upwards, right?
Right. That's what's happening. And now one of the controversies around, not necessarily around this novel, but that implicates this novel, is that in the novel where, with another character who fails upwards famously, Jerzy Kosiński's novel Being There, or as Americans know him, Jerzy Kosiński, unfortunately, pronouncing his name the same way as they pronounce the name of the Unabomber, which is spelled completely differently, right? Kaczynski and not Kosiński, but they all become Kosiński in English. So in Kosiński's novel, Being There, we have a character who's very similar. He's not like Dyzma is kind of like he's a bit of a small time swindler. I mean, he knows what he's doing, whereas part of Kosiński's critique of American culture is that this is a person who's been like kind of completely obsessed with television and the media, and he lives in a kind of a bubble, and he's totally unaware of anything going on outside of the world, and he just repeats things that he's heard on television, and people around him, like the people around Dyzma, believe that he's saying very like profound things because out of context they sound that way, but really he's just reproducing these phrases that he's heard. And at the time, of Kosiński's novel, there were, articles accusing him of plagiarism. But unless you happen to know this novel in Polish, which wasn't translated into English at the time, no one would know what he was talking about. So nobody could really evaluate that claim that Kosiński was plagiarizing a novel. But here we have it this is the novel that we're talking about. It might not be plagiarism in that, he doesn't seem to have, it's not like he's like translated the novel without attribution or something like that. It's set in a different time. It's set in a different context. And there are kind of different, social problems that it gets to. But clearly there's inspiration there. He's been inspired by the story. And I'm wondering what you think about that.
So perhaps I will start because just for today, we prepared like several passages that are strikingly similar in both in the just in Career of Nicodemus Dyzma and in Being There. And actually, I would call it I think it is a plagiarism. And so when we were choosing a novel to translate, so then partially we thought we were curious to what extent this claim that it was a plagiarism was justified. So yes, so I think that we could find actually two passages. They're really almost identical, but there are actually more of them. So just really short ones. So just there are certain sentences that go through both novels. So just one is, thank God there are still men like you around to give aid and comfort. And in Career of Nicodemus Dyzma is just to save our country. So this is just almost identical, the two sentences. Or again, the same sentence, you have a great gift of being natural, and that is a rare talent and the true mark of a leader. So in both novels, we have just exactly the same. And also there are like scenes, and I don't know whether we can call them plagiarism, but this is like the best possible cultural translation from Polish to English and from time to time, and from actually Polish to American English. So that just, they're absolutely fantastic. So there is, for example, a scene when a publisher named Stigler tries to convince Chance Gardiner to publish a book. And Chance says, I do not write, or I do not read. And just Stigler responds, of course, who can nowadays? Who has time? So even, and just there is like there is a scene in the Career that mirrors this episode. It's the conversation between Dyzma and Kosiński. So Dyzma says, but I don't know anything. I'm jobless. So just and Kosiński says, oh, of course. Nowadays, everyone is jobless. So just it's really amazing. And also the tension between, or the attraction between just E.E. and Gardiner and Dyzma and Countess Ponimirska. I think it's very similar. So just this, I think that the excerpts, the passages we chose really reflect that.
All right. So you sent me this in advance, and it's a bit recomposed from the text as it appears in translation, or as it appeared in the translation, or in the original. But it's recomposed in a way that shows the phrases that Kosiński uses that seem to mirror the phrases from Dołęga-Mostowicz. This is the scene with Nina and Dyzma she's flirting with him, and he's like thinking about how to react. She gazed at him sorrowfully. Her lips quivered, and the corners of her eyes were shiny with tears. And you will run away from here, that's for certain. No, he vehemently rejected this idea, thinking of his salary. I want to stay here as long as I can. She offered him her hand, from which wafted the scent of perfume. Her voice began to tremble, and her bosom heaved with sobbing. God, God, she wept, you are so good to me, so good. You are a man, a strong, firm, self-contained character. You don't know what loneliness is because you are an entity unto yourself. Here's the comparable passage from Being There. She looked tired. She brushed her hair from her forehead and, looking at him quietly, put her hand on his arm. Please don't run away from me. Don't. Chance was bewildered. There was clearly no place to which he could run away. Suddenly, she began to cry, sobbing and blowing her nose. She took out her handkerchief. Her tears wet his skin, and Chance smelled her perfume. I'm grateful to you, Chauncey, she said. You are a man of restraint. Do you know that you are brainy, very cerebral, really, Chauncey? That you want to conquer the woman from within her very own self? Definitely, he's rewriting the scene, I think, for for a different audience. Is it plagiarism? It's close. It's pretty close. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. That's but that's not the question that that we're here to decide today. But it does say that it's such a first of all, it's very interesting that Kosiński he place so much value in this work, right? I mean, it's a sign that that this was something culturally important and clever, and
evidently it was one of his favorite books from his youth as well.
And absolutely something worth translating and presenting to a larger audience. To what extent is it like Shakespeare using the ancient Greek novels like Pyramus and Thisbe to write Romeo and Juliet? Maybe it's not on that level. All right. So, but it's.
Oh, please go ahead.
Go ahead. But it's not unheard of to borrow stories.
Oh, no, not at all. And I think that, there is a timelessness about the idea that, about the righteous anger at a society that is so self-serving and so self-protective and so, frankly, narcissistic that at every level, people just hear what they want to hear, and they hear whatever will give them the opportunity that they want. And I just think that was as true in the 60s as it was in the 30s, as it is now.
Yeah, and also I just I would like to come back what you said before about Kosiński, who was obviously fascinated by Mostowicz's prose. And I just think that we can. Mostowicz was just a masterful storyteller. So it's hard not to compare Mostowicz to Sienkiewicz. So Gombrowicz I described Sienkiewicz as a first-rate, second-rate writer, and these words fit Mostowicz like a glove. I would say that they both had a fantastic sense of humor. They were good observers of society. Of human foibles and strengths, and both created characters that were almost proverbial in Polish culture. And Sienkiewicz and Mostowicz's novel were serialized in newspapers. And people were buying them to find out what would happen next and how would the story end. And I think that it's really interesting that when Sienkiewicz killed one of his most popular fictional characters, people in Warsaw celebrated masses and prayed for the peace of his soul. I believe it was Longinus Podbipięta from the trilogy. And when Mostowicz kept publishing the chapters of the prosecutor Alicja Horn, the telephone in his apartment kept ringing constantly. And the readers were begging him to save young, beautiful, naive Julka from a wicked, ruthless man named Drucki Winkler. And they wrote even letters. Dear sir, do not allow this scoundrel to harm her, as if Julka was a real person. So such was Mostowicz's influence on popular culture. So I think that he was very much underappreciated, that just he was well ahead of his time. Although not as a perhaps writer of ground literature. So he was one of the earliest proponents of popular literature, and he understood its importance. And Kosiński actually proved it in his novel. So Mostowicz had a well-defined socio-artistic program, and he consequently implemented it in his writing. So in his actually mid-20s, he wrote in 1925, he wrote in Rzeczpospolita that when hardworking people come back from work, after a day or night shift, exhausted and sleepy, they would not reach for philosophical essays. So if they would do different things. So if they find pleasure in one well-written book, where the main characters are relevant to them, and they can finally just identify with the main characters, they will start reading. And so they will buy one book and another book and another book. And so just it was Mostowicz's way to promote, this is how he wanted to promote literacy. And I think that it was really amazing. And what was also really amazing, that despite of his like the social program and his popularity, just the interwar period, the critics, they had never appreciated him. So just never ever. And it's not even that they wrote like not positive reviews. So just sometimes they didn't even acknowledge his novels. So when he published the Career of Nicodemus Dyzma, he really waited. He was eager just to read the reviews, and especially in the literary magazines. And nothing happened, just nothing. So yet everyone talked about this book. Everyone read this book. And the literary critics from all circles, leftist, liberal, national Democrat, Christian Democrat, so they remained silent. So, we don't know why. Perhaps because they were envy. It was just they envied him. And perhaps because there was a belief among them that ground literature, good ground literature, cannot be so popular and so easy to read. And so that really good writers should be poor and existentially troubled, and not so successful as Dyzma. And actually, it was his fate till the end of the 30s, till he died. Not Dyzma, Mostowicz, I'm sorry, I just misspoke. He himself started talking about his writings with some disregard. So he said, I'm not writing, I'm earning money. And also he coined a famous phrase. In Polish, it's wolę Buika od pomnika, and in English it will be, I prefer a Buick to a monument. And it's just, that's really fantastic. So I think that it adds some flavor to the figure of to Mostowicz himself, because just partially we also chose this novel because he was fascinating as a writer, and he was really he was a celebrity in Poland in the 30s, and he was an enormously prolific writer. He was a columnist, a screenplay writer. He penned 17 novels within in the span of only 10 years. So I think that all those details are really important. So
in the 40s, right? You see, he was killed in 1939 in a
And even this fact that he was killed just by a Soviet soldier did not make him a hero during the for a long time. For obvious reasons, after the war, it was not a very politically appropriate. Even this fact, it is a heroic act that he sacrificed his life for his country, is not actually emphasized. And also,
if he'd been killed by a German, then that would have made things different.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, and there is not much written about Mostowicz. As far as I know, there are only 2 extensive biographies. One was published in the late 80s by Józef Rurawski, and another one was published just recently. Jarosław Górski published Mostowicz biography in 2021.
Do you have any plans to translate more of these novels by Mostowicz to bring them to the English-speaking public?
What do you think, Megan? Because I don't think so. I think that the Career of Nicodemus Dyzma
is the high point of his.
Yes. It was his best novel. So, and there are some other novels probably that are also universal, but there were hundreds of other novels similar to them. So this one is just exceptional. I would say it's unique because it's just the figure, the Dyzma figure is, it's an archetype, I would say. So just we can call this phenomenon Dyzmism. It does in Polish. Just sometimes we say that it's just this is a clear pattern of behavior.
Although I will say that we are very interested in this particular time period.
Yeah.
Are you working on any other joint projects right now? Or thinking about them?
Actually, we're translating a couple chapters of several different books and kind of seeing what sticks, and we're experimenting with some different things. So to be announced soon. But we're working on some new projects right now as well.
Okay. And I'm wondering, Eva, since many people who watch our program are students interested in Polish culture, can you say a few words? You had the Polish language program, right, at the University of Michigan?
At the University of Michigan, yes. So we have actually a very strong language program, and not only language program. Our Polish program is very strong, and but I mainly teach the language and also culture. But we offer 4 years of language instruction in the department, in our department. So just it's quite unique, just in the States. So and we have fantastic students who actually study the language from scratch. So they are just interested in Polish culture, history, literature, but also quite a healthy cohort of heritage speakers. So and we teach both. So very often offering independent study courses. So it's it's a great program.
Do you have enough students to have?
Beloved teacher too. I wanted to vouch for her that she is a fantastic instructor in Polish, and she has legions of fans at University of Michigan.
So can I vouch for you just as well? I would say that Megan is a fantastic translator. So yeah, that's, when we talk about Mostowicz, when we talk about Sienkiewicz, we talk about their like fantastic ability. They were absolutely fantastic observers. So, and they were able to write just in a witty and entertaining manner. And Megan has this ability. She has this skill. And actually, when I talk about our collaboration, I love just one comparison that actually we are a sniper team. So I'm the pointer and Megan is the shooter. And she is a damn good shooter. She doesn't miss. So it's just, yeah. Mm-hmm.
David, you could turn off your computer, your camera. We can just compliment each other, me and Eva, for the next half an hour, and then just kidding.
Well. On that note, I want to thank you both for being here. It's been great talking to you and introducing a wider public to the career of Nicodemus Dyzma, which is a wonderful novel.
Thank you very much for highlighting this
Thank you so much for inviting us.
Wait up. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell to receive notifications about new videos from the Polish Cultural Institute, New York. Go to the Polish Cultural Institute's website linked in the description below to see a full schedule of upcoming episodes. Stay tuned for the credits for some recommendations about how you can support aid for Ukraine and for Ukrainians fleeing the war in their country. I'd like to thank all the people who helped make this series possible. The Polish Cultural Institute, New York sponsors our program. Bartek Remisko, head of humanities and literature at the Polish Cultural Institute, New York, suggested this series and is our executive producer. My fellow producer, Natalia Iudin, handles all the video editing, technical, and aesthetic aspects of this production. Claudia Owłona-Draber, head of communications at the Polish Cultural Institute, New York, keeps us all informed about upcoming episodes of Encounters with Polish Literature and other events organized by the Polish Cultural Institute, New York. Thank you all for listening and reading along with us. Let's meet again in a month when we'll look at the master of Polish fantasy fiction, Andrzej Sapkowski, author of the Witcher series, now on Netflix and widely popular as a video game, with translator David French. See you then.